My cousin laughed. "You'll never get the estate." After changing Grandpa's will. So I found out she'd bribed his lawyer and had the entire will nullified. I was standing in my cramped kitchen, halfway through peeling a potato for Sunday dinner, when my phone buzzed. Absent-mindedly, I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced at the screen. It was a message from Marlena in our family group chat with my cousins Scott and Natalie. Usually, the group chat was just a mix of harmless jokes, silly photos, and updates about Aunt Lorna's cat or someone's kid hitting another milestone. But tonight, Marlena had sent a picture of our grandpa's estate, the Grand Victorian Mansion in Springfield, Massachusetts, that had been in our family for generations. Underneath it, she typed a sentence that made me stop cold. "Can't believe it's going to be all mine soon," she wrote, followed by a line of smug-looking emojis. I blinked, genuinely unsure if I was reading it right. Marlena could be a lot of things, sure, but the last time I checked, Grandpa was alive and still very much in control of his estate. And if he was in his right mind, he'd never give everything to just one of us. We'd all grown up hearing Grandpa's clear-cut plans about his will. He was big on fairness and family unity, and that estate was supposed to be split 4 ways among us grandkids. Before I could even process what Marlena was hinting at, Scott's reply came through, breaking the shocked silence hanging over my little kitchen. "Marlena, what are you talking about? Why would the estate go to you?" Scott had never been one to dance around an issue. He was the reliable, no-nonsense one in our family and the glue that kept our little chat from devolving into chaos over the years. But Marlena didn't even pause before firing back. "Oh, I just spent last weekend with Grandpa," she replied. "He told me he was changing things up and asked me to be the executor. Said he wanted it to stay in one piece, you know? Just let it go, guys. I don't make the rules." Natalie chimed in, too. "Wait, hold on. Are you saying Grandpa changed his will? Why would he do that and not tell any of us? We've all been under the impression it was getting split evenly." "Oh, Nat," Marlena replied, her tone practically oozing condescension through the screen. "It's not like he owes us a heads up. He just knows I'll do what's best. And besides, he's tired. Don't you think he'd rather have someone he trusts managing things?" I couldn't help myself. Before I knew it, my finger hovered over the call button next to Marlena's name. I hit it, feeling a mix of anger, disbelief, and maybe even a little bit of fear. This wasn't just some throwaway comment. If Grandpa really had changed the will, it would change everything. She answered on the second ring. Well, look who decided to call," she said, her voice as smug and self-assured as her texts. "Don't tell me you're upset over a little family business?" "Marlena," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What exactly are you talking about? You're saying Grandpa just changed his mind, without telling the rest of us? That he's leaving everything to you?" "Not everything," she replied, in that lazy, careless tone of hers that she used to dismiss anything she didn't find worth her time. "I'm sure you'll all get something. Eventually." "Eventually?" I repeated, feeling the words catch in my throat. "Are you serious? The estate means something to all of us. It's part of our family. How is that fair?" She sighed, her tone growing even more patronizing. "Look, Seth. I didn't make the rules. Grandpa asked me to be the executor. He said he wants to keep things simple. Maybe if you'd actually visited him more often, he'd have thought about you more, too. Just a thought." My stomach twisted at that little dig. Sure, I hadn't been as close to Grandpa in the last few years. Life got in the way, I guess, work, my own family, living an hour out of town. But I still saw him, still made it for holidays and birthdays. And he'd always seemed just as happy to see me as he was to see any of us. "That's not fair, and you know it," I replied. "Just because you're the one who lives nearby doesn't mean you deserve everything. We all have a stake in this." She laughed then, a cold, hollow sound that didn't even try to hide her glee. "Seth, don't be so dramatic. Grandpa clearly trusts me to handle it. You and Scott and Natalie will get whatever's left. It's his decision. So just let it go." Before I could argue any further, she hung up. I stared at the phone, my pulse pounding in my ears, the potato peeler still clenched in my other hand. Something about this didn't add up, and my gut told me there was more to this story. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, tossing and turning, replaying the conversation with Marlena over and over in my head. Grandpa hadn't been well the past year. His arthritis had flared up, and he'd been in and out of the hospital for various things, mostly just age catching up with him. But I never once thought he'd be so unwell that he'd consider changing his will in secret, especially not without telling us. At around 3 a.m, I made up my mind. Grandpa's lawyer, Curtis Grant, had been handling his affairs for as long as I could remember. Curtis was an old friend of the family, practically another uncle to us growing up. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be him. So, the next morning, I pulled on my best shirt, skipped breakfast, and made my way downtown to Curtis's office, a nondescript little brick building with a brass plaque that read Grant and Meyer. I walked into the reception area and tried not to look as anxious as I felt. The receptionist looked up and gave me a polite smile. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? No, I said, rubbing the back of my neck, but I was hoping to speak with Curtis. It's about my grandfather, Albert Finch. Her face softened, and she nodded. Let me check if he's free. Have a seat. I sat down on one of the stiff leather chairs, bouncing my leg nervously as I waited. After a few minutes, she returned with a nod. Mr. Grant can see you now. Follow me, please. Curtis's office was as I remembered it, lined with shelves of thick law books and framed diplomas, the smell of leather and old wood filling the air. He looked up from his desk as I entered, giving me a warm smile. Seth. Good to see you, son, he said, standing up to shake my hand. What brings you by? Your grandfather's all right, I hope? Yeah, he's fine, I said, feeling a pang of guilt for not visiting Grandpa more often. But, I needed to ask you something. It's about his will. Curtis's smile faded, and he gestured for me to sit down. Go on. Has Grandpa made any changes to it? Like, recently? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Curtis leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. Why do you ask? I took a deep breath. Because Marlena, my cousin, said that he changed it. She said he named her the executor and that he's leaving the entire estate to her. She's saying it like it's a done deal, and the rest of us are. Well, I guess she's implying we're out of luck. Curtis's expression tightened. That's quite a claim. I wasn't aware of any recent changes. But if there were changes, would you know? I pressed. I mean, would he have to go through you? He hesitated, then nodded. I've been handling your grandfather's estate for decades. He trusts me with his affairs, and he's always been very open with me about his wishes. He hasn't mentioned anything to me about changing the will. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. So then, Marlena's lying? I wouldn't jump to conclusions just yet, Curtis said cautiously, but I will say it's highly unlikely he'd change something so significant without consulting me. And even if he did, he'd want to inform his family, especially all of you. I leaned forward, desperation edging into my voice. Curtis, if she's lying about this, what can I do? Can I challenge her? Curtis leaned back, looking thoughtful. First, we need to establish whether there actually was a change. It might be worth speaking to your grandfather directly. If he's in sound mind, he can clear this up for us. I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Right. Okay, I'll talk to him. As I stood up to leave, Curtis looked at me with a strange expression. And Seth, he added, if you do find anything out, let me know. I'll be here to help you however I can. I thanked him and left, feeling a renewed sense of determination. I left Curtis's office with a pit of anger and determination gnawing at me. Marlena had crossed a line, but I wasn't about to let her bulldoze our family's legacy for her own gain. I spent the rest of the day pacing around, wondering if I should call Grandpa, show up unannounced, or even confront Marlena again. Finally, I decided to go see Grandpa in person. He might not be as sharp as he once was, but I knew that if he was at all aware, he'd want to set this straight himself. So, the next morning, I drove over to his estate, the place we'd spent so many childhood summers running around in his gardens and exploring the attic filled with family heirlooms. Just seeing the house stirred something fierce in me. This place meant everything to our family, and the thought of Marlena snatching it away under our noses made my blood boil. When I pulled up, Grandpa was on the front porch, sitting in his usual wicker chair, his old cane resting by his side. He looked up, squinting, as I walked over. Seth? He called out, smiling a little. What brings you by, son? I walked up the steps, my hands stuffed in my pockets. Hey, Grandpa. I just wanted to see you. Got some things on my mind, actually. He gestured for me to sit down beside him. Well, you know I'm always here to talk, kid. I took a seat, trying to find the right words. Grandpa, Marlena's been saying some things about the estate. She told us that you've made her the executor and that everything's going to her. She made it sound like it's all hers now. Grandpa's brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing. She said what? Yeah, she's been telling us all in the family chat. Acting like she's already the owner. It didn't sit right with me, so I went to see Curtis. He said he hadn't heard anything about changes. Grandpa sighed, a look of hurt crossing his face. I never changed the will, Seth. Not a single word of it. I always wanted that house and land to be shared equally. That was my plan from the start, and I haven't changed it. Relief flooded over me, but I felt a surge of anger on Grandpa's behalf. Marlena had been feeding us all a story, banking on none of us challenging her. But why? Why go through all this trouble if she hadn't actually changed anything? Grandpa, I said slowly, do you think she might have tried to do something with your will? Like, gone to another lawyer? Maybe tried to make you sign something? He looked down, his hand clutching the arm of his chair tightly. She was here last week. Kept talking about how tired I must be and how hard it was managing everything. I didn't sign anything, though. But she did bring a friend of hers, a lawyer, I think. I didn't trust him. They kept saying it was just for some small changes, but I sent them packing. A cold chill ran through me. Marlena was willing to go as far as bringing in her own lawyer, hoping Grandpa would be too tired or confused to object. "Grandpa," I said, my voice firm, "I think she's trying to pull one over on you. And the rest of us, but we're not going to let her get away with it." He nodded, a determined glint in his eye. "Good. I want this settled fair and square." As I left the estate, an idea began to form. I couldn't just confront Marlena directly. If she'd gone as far as bringing in her own lawyer, she'd have an answer for everything. But I needed proof that she'd tried to manipulate Grandpa and, ideally, expose her for what she was. That's when it hit me, Grandpa's house had security cameras. That afternoon, I asked Grandpa if he'd let me pull footage from the security system. He was a little confused, but he gave me permission, and I went into the small security room in the back of the house, where Grandpa kept the old tapes. After combing through hours of footage from last week, I found what I was looking for, a clear recording of Marlena and her so-called lawyer on the front porch, trying to convince Grandpa to sign a set of papers. On the video, you could hear her saying things like, "Grandpa, this is just to make things easier for you. You won't have to worry about the estate anymore. I'll take care of everything." And the lawyer, too, was egging him on, saying, "It's a standard procedure, Mr. Finch. Just sign here, and we'll handle the rest." But Grandpa was adamant, waving them off, saying, "I don't need things easier, I need them fair." Watching her try to sweet-talk him, guilt him, and even subtly threaten him filled me with a new level of anger. I knew what I had to do next. The next morning, I called Curtis and told him about the footage. He was as furious as I was and agreed that we needed to handle this carefully. We arranged a family meeting at Grandpa's house for that weekend. Curtis promised he'd be there to support Grandpa and help explain things to everyone. When Saturday rolled around, we all gathered in Grandpa's grand living room. Marlena, Scott, Natalie, and Grandpa was there, sitting with Curtis by his side. Marlena strolled in last, looking calm and self-assured. She even gave me a smug look, like she knew she'd already won. "All right," Curtis began, glancing around at all of us. "Thank you all for coming. There's been some misunderstanding about Mr. Finch's will, and he wanted to clear things up." Marlena put on her best innocent smile. "Oh, there's no misunderstanding, Curtis. Grandpa and I had a good talk last week. He wanted to keep things simple, you know?" Curtis raised an eyebrow. "Yes, so I've heard. But I think we need to clarify a few things, Marlena." Before she could respond, I took out my laptop and plugged it into the TV. "Grandpa has security cameras all over the estate. And it turns out they recorded your conversation from last week." Marlena's face paled. "What? What do you mean?" I pressed play, and the footage began. The entire room watched as the video showed Marlena and her lawyer trying to manipulate Grandpa, cooing at him to just sign the papers. The more they watched, the angrier Scott and Natalie got. Marlena tried to cut in, but Curtis silenced her with a sharp look. By the end of the video, everyone was stunned. Scott shook his head, looking disgusted. "I can't believe you'd do this, Marlena. To Grandpa, of all people." Natalie crossed her arms, glaring at Marlena. "You tried to cheat us, Marlena. Cheat the whole family. That's unforgivable." Marlena's mask of confidence crumbled, and she sputtered, "I was just trying to make things easier. You all know Grandpa's getting old, and I thought." "Enough," Grandpa interrupted, his voice steady and full of disappointment. "I trusted you, Marlena. I thought you were helping me out of love, not greed." Curtis nodded. "Based on this footage, I believe we have grounds to file a legal complaint against your lawyer for unethical behavior. And, Marlena, I'll be advising your grandfather to remove you from the will entirely unless you can give him one good reason why you should remain in it." Marlena looked around the room, her face a mix of anger and desperation. But no one moved to defend her. She tried to plead with Grandpa, but he just shook his head, looking heartbroken. "I think you should leave, Marlena," he said quietly. "You've done enough harm." With nothing else to say, Marlena stormed out, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, the door slamming behind her. We all sat in silence for a moment, letting the dust settle. Grandpa looked at the rest of us, his face softening. "I just wanted you all to be taken care of," he said. "I never wanted this kind of division. You're my family." Scott put a hand on Grandpa's shoulder. "We know, Grandpa. And we'll honor that. Together." Over the next few weeks, Curtis helped Grandpa make some changes, ensuring the estate was set to be split equally, as he'd always wanted. Marlena tried to reach out a few times, first with apologies, then with threats, but no one took her seriously anymore. She was out, both from the will and from our lives. And though it was sad to lose a family member, we all felt like justice had been served. When it was all over, I felt a sense of peace, knowing Grandpa's legacy was secure. The estate stayed in the family, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we'd finally united in a way that Marlena could never understand.